Welcome to the Small Business Show. My name is Swire from Garuda Promo. Today we have again Amy Greenwald from Blue Raspberry Design. We talked about branding guy from our last interview, and then I know Amy do a lot of green design and web design. So I wanted to invite Amy back to talk about that. How are you doing, Amy?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me back, Swire. Excited to talk about this topic.
Yeah, funny thing, I know that you have redesigned your website, and I was actually looking through that when I do my research for the show. And I noticed that you have a website carbon calculator. So I did my website, we scored pretty good for our company. And then I got interested. I put in Amazon.com. I also put in Walmart.com. Also for a known green company, Patagonia.com. So I'm surprised that Amazon obviously score the most carbon footprint, but I'm surprised that Walmart actually score lower than Patagonia. So I want to ask you, what is the concept of green graphic and web design? Can you tell the viewer a little bit more about what's in it?
Yeah, for sure. So green graphic and web design is really all about analyzing everything that you're using and seeing how it impacts the environment. Back to your example with the websites, Patagonia might use more large images. Those are a huge drain on resources, and they produce a lot of carbon with how large their file sizes are. And I think green web design is especially something that we don't necessarily think about until we put it in those carbon footprints, because I mean, like you hear go paperless, go green, and then everything's all in this digital cloud. But it actually does have a carbon footprint associated with it.
Okay, I'm going to share your slide. I know that you're going to talk about it in detail. Can you? It's very interesting. I'm surprised. Maybe they are more picture heavy. I would assume that Walmart, when you go on there, you probably are not looking at beautiful pictures. You just want to buy your product. But then for Patagonia, they probably have models. They have landscape pictures of why you should buy their product. So maybe that's why.
Yeah, for sure. That definitely probably leans into it. Yeah. So for my slides, we can kind of talk a little bit about what green graphic and green web design really is. And I think the simplest way to define it is design with the planet and its people in mind. Really thinking through what impacts all of your decisions are making in terms of materials, in terms of energy usage. And I mean, the climate crisis is kind of upon us. And in the second part of adding keeping people in mind, it's really recognizing that communities of color, poor communities, and coastal communities, island nations, they're getting disproportionately impacted by climate change. And so we really need to keep them in mind as we're making decisions. But it also goes, I mean, way beyond material choice too. So like with the having huge images on your website, like, yeah, that drains into it. But then also thinking about, okay, like what's the hardware that the website's running on? How did those materials come about? Were the employees who created the hardware, who mined the resources, were they ethically treated? Same goes with paper. Was the material ethically sourced, or is forestry has this chance to disrupt ecosystems and destroy the soil if it's not done properly? And then really also thinking about the end life of something. I mean, as designers, we don't like to think about when our print designs end up in a landfill or recycled, but it's going to happen at some point. So really just thinking about how is it going to impact our planet when the design has lived its
Yeah, funny story. We recently worked with a hospitality client, a hotel that they're trying to open up. And then the marketing manager told us, whatever that you're trying to offer us, we don't want anything that's plastic, no plastic at all. So, kudos to them for doing a good job. So, but it make us, dig deeper. Obviously there are things that we could offer to them that have no plastic. We went with paper, we went with bottles, with different things that we have. But sometimes it's challenging, to go away with what we are used to, and how much deeper would you say they have to design in order to be sustainable?
I think that. So, I mean, sustainability is kind of a whole spectrum. You can do all the research into the nitty gritty of how paper company creates their paper. But honestly, I think with what you said about just avoiding plastic, that's already a huge step in the right direction. I mean, especially since every piece of plastic that's ever been created like still exists today, and it will exist for a really long time. So yeah, just switching away from plastic to more sustainable materials is already a really good step. Um, yeah. And more on materials. So these are just some examples of really easy to implement things that you can just like do probably like today, using recycled or tree-free paper. So 100% post-consumer recycled paper is going to be one of the best over using virgin tree fiber. Or even looking at, they make cotton paper, they make paper from hemp, they make it from straw. For traditional copy paper, there's sugar sheet paper that exists out there that they make from sugar, which is really awesome. So many different options, and this can really elevate the design too, because I mean, most of the time they have some cool grain in them, and it can really just elevate everything. And then when you're considering printing on them, choosing local or green printers is going to be huge. Some printers use plant-based, soy-based inks over the traditional petroleum-based. And the vegetable inks are actually much brighter than the traditional inks. And then they can be composted and all that other good stuff. So they're much more friendly on the environment. But if you also don't have a green printer near you, choosing local, even with the petroleum-based inks, is still going to be more beneficial, because then you don't have that carbon footprint of transport. And then lastly, avoiding foils and laminates. So metallic foils actually are toxic. And when they end up in a landfill, because they render a paper non-recyclable, they will leach those toxins into groundwater.
Yeah, jump in real quick though, but foil printing are really impressive, right?
Yeah.
When sometimes we do like a paper Euro toe, right? If you put a foil printing on there, it will pop with the logo more. So I think like my question to you is, obviously we are more sustainable, and when we know that we're going green, there are options that we are not able to use compared to the traditional method. Like you mentioned, soy-based ink. I'm in California, so I think by the standard, a lot of printer that I have worked with, they always go soy-based ink. Maybe just from the different region that you're physically in. So from a designer perspective, I know that by going a silver foil will pop my logo more. So if we wanted to avoid using foil and then maybe spot UV or UV gloss, what are the options that you could help them to create the same, design or look that they're trying to do?
Yeah, I do want to add in that I think using foil on things like book covers or other pieces that are going to exist for a really long time that you're not going to throw out, like that you're not going to mass produce. Like obviously business cards get thrown out, they're mass produced. Those are probably one of the worst things you can use on it. But for looking at other options, some green ways to do it are using letterpress, embossing, or debossing. Those, I mean, they're not going to give the shine that the foil will give, but they still make an impression, and they can still add that extra little bit of luxury. Or even if you want to do a die cut, depending on how simple your logo is, you could do a die cut of your logo and then have like a different colored paper behind it. I think there's a lot of options and ways that designers can be creative within these regulations.
Nice. That's a good way to counter it. Die cuts and maybe different folds. You can make it very impressive. Even using, recycled material. I have worked with clients that went really far with the type of material that they have, and they make from brown paper bag. And even in our promotional industry, jackets and T-shirts sometimes are made with recyclable bottles. They cost more, but then, if this is, what you guys are looking for, it is available. So it's just, it's a choice. I think, you don't have to, but then if this is what you stand by, there are still other choices, and there are resources when you do design. There are things that you could stay away from if that's your goal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think making it a choice and helping clients make informed choices is really what this is all about. Just letting them understand their impact. And with other things with business cards, like soft touch is a super popular finish. And those are tear resistant. They feel really nice, luxury, velvety. They're water resistant. Those are actually created with a plastic laminate. And so those become a single-use plastic once you create business cards like that. And so one of my big desires would be for companies to actually say that, to say, hey, these aren't recyclable when you create them. Would it deter some people from buying them? Potentially, but I think that it's important for everybody to know what they're putting in the environment, especially because, I mean, these things aren't super commonly talked about or common knowledge. I mean, I had no idea until I just researched it one day. So I think that's a huge place where we can all do better, is just
Yeah,
sharing the knowledge.
I've used it, a seeded paper once for a client. So like knowing me as being me, I actually planted that paper just for a test, and then after 2 weeks, actually one seed sprouts. So it does work, and
Yeah.
I was really surprised, and and happy that really there are those options available out there.
Yeah, for sure. Those are super cool. And it's so memorable for any brand who uses something like that. I mean, you'll be telling everybody about it because it's such a unique experience.
It's good for marketing to imagine that, if you're sending like a brochure or even your business card, something like that, so with the right message. So, we will grow together, or we will something together. And then you ask your client to plan it, then it could be, good social media posting. Now it's actually grew to something, right? So I think for the marketing standpoint, you could create a certain campaign or messages too to fit into all the sustainable branding that you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it becomes definitely much more of a marketing brand standpoint rather than a limitation.
Mhm.
Yeah. So as we talked about, I mean, earlier with web design, and how that impacts the environment, I think print materials are so easy to, I mean, imagine. We touch them, they're all tangible, and the web is kind of out there on this cloud that we don't know about. So really, digital is not green. We often like to think so, especially as companies, with billing and stuff, they're like, go paperless, go green, like do all this stuff to be more friendly to the environment. But um, digital space is actually pretty heavy polluter. So data centers, which are the places that house the servers that websites live on, they emit as much CO2 as the airline industry, which is about
Wow.
2 to 3% of global emissions every year.
Wow.
And this, yeah, it's like crazy, especially because it's, people don't talk about it. We think of the web as this like really
We don't
green
see
space.
it, and we don't really touch it, and we think that all the things that we upload, and then when I want to play it, it plays, and that's all.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially as like streaming and everything else has become more popular, it's only growing. And by 2040, it's actually expected to emit about 14% of the world's CO2, which is equivalent to what the United States outputs today.
Wow.
I mean, hopefully by that point, we'll have a lot more renewable energy and the carbon footprint will not be as high. But definitely something to keep in mind, as it really is only growing, especially as technology advances. I mean, now we have 4K screens, and so people are demanding better quality, and better quality is inherently larger file sizes, and you need more storage, and that outputs more carbon. And yeah, there's a lot that goes with it. But thankfully, there's a lot of easy things that we can all implement, especially as web designers. So one, you can choose a green web host. There's some really awesome options out there, and they run their servers on renewable energy. Or look to see if they can't use renewable energy for absolutely everything, if they offset their carbon, see if their hardware is energy efficient, and make sure that they're properly recycling their hardware, because as old servers die out, if they're not being recycled and they end up in a landfill, they're going to leach toxins into groundwater as well. And then second, kind of think about it as a minimalist approach, not necessarily like you need to cut everything out, but just, you don't have to put your entire life story on your website, even though you have the space for it. Really think about and consider your goals with your website. Limit the number of pages that you use, make it really easy to navigate. Repurpose some other content into blog posts, social media posts, and really leverage marketing in that way, and then just leave your website as the most important information that everybody needs to know about you. And then lastly, limiting and optimizing images and video. Images are the biggest source of file sizes for web pages, a web page is actually recommended to be 500 kilobytes or less. And right now the average, yeah, really small. The average web page is actually around 3 to 4 megabytes, so quite large. And a lot of this is due to images, video, scripts, the rise of using custom fonts. I mean, I know how easy it is to save out an image, and that right there is your 500 kilobytes. But yeah, just making sure that everything.
But do you think it also depends on, when we talk about sustainable brand, are there certain industry that is better than the other? So because what I'm thinking is, for example, when you talk about minimalist approach, if I'm a lawyer, I'm more text heavy and I'm more words, for the number of things that they do, compared to if I'm in e-commerce, I'm in the clothing industry, right? So I need to have model, nice looking. So then you think about buying my product. So obviously, a lawyer will have less images than an e-commerce and clothing business. So do you look at it like that, or you can also optimize even if they have a lot of pictures on their website?
Yeah, I think that definitely plays into a lot. And actually, there is a clothing company called Organic Basics, and they have their regular website up, which is full of really large photos that are just gorgeous. And then they created a low impact website. And what they did there actually is they eliminated all of their huge images, they eliminated video, and they just changed their images into line drawings of their products. Which for returning customers, they obviously know what they want, so they don't need to see the image. And then for those that need to see more, they have lower res photos to see the actual product. So I think that there are ways to do it. Obviously, a clothing company is just going to have more images, more things to put on there. But I think there are some creative ways that we can look at web design and really think about, okay, how large does this image really need to be? Do I need all of this, or can I simplify? And just really asking those questions.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, and then bringing it all back to branding. Really, sustainable branding is going to be your marketing altogether, but it's also going to be about, who you are as a company. So it starts with a company's values. For example, if you are a dentist and you want to lower your carbon impact, like using recycled paper, all that stuff is all going to be really, really great. But you kind of need to look into your own industry too and see what sustainable practices exist within it. So within dentistry, you can, instead of giving away normal plastic toothbrushes, you can swap over to bamboo. You can use toothpaste tablets instead of the plastic toothpaste tubes, mouthwash tablets instead of the plastic bottles. So that's just one field example, but I think that there's so many ways for so many different fields to be sustainable. And then in order to really make that impact, you need to be transparent about it. Have a sustainability page on your website. Talk about what you're doing. Just tell your customers why they should choose you and what you're doing to help the planet, and really just being authentic about it.
Yeah, I think another thing that you just mentioned, we should ask for customer feedback too. Maybe you're a brand that put a fancy presentation, put it in a nice box with styrofoam and to protect your product. Maybe it's nice to ask the client, what kind of packaging would you guys be happy with? Obviously, we want to make sure that you like the brand experience, you feel the value that we're trying to sell your product on. But then maybe having those conversations, you might find out that you might not need all that fancy packaging because people just want to buy your brand and support your product and services because of your brand. So yeah. I think having those conversations might eliminate some of the unnecessary packaging bags, or you could basically maybe bundle them all together and skip, a few type of boxes packaging. So I think we waste a lot of packaging. Whenever I receive a package, there are a lot of things that I throw away, and I have little tiny pieces of product that I actually need. So like big old boxes to protect it. So I think from those standpoint, especially in promotional product, how you package it, how you send it out, there are ways that you could do it more efficiently than, if this is what you really want to stand by. There are different ways to do it, like you suggest, but then you have to think kind of outside of the box and maybe don't go with industry standard. Industry standard is maybe you have to print all those material, you have to do foil printing, you have to do plastic wrap on every single thing. Maybe there are things that you don't need to do all those plastic bagging, and are you willing to look into it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, sometimes we don't want to look into those things because it's huge change. It's going to cost time to do it. But yeah, in the long run, if you can eliminate a ton of packaging, you're going to save so much money too, because you're not going to have these unnecessary plastic wraps that people just throw away anyway. Yeah, for sure. I think that's really important. And that's also where a designer can help you, especially with your brand in looking at sustainability. And there's a couple other things that a designer can help you with. So, I mean, with a brand, as you have a color palette, why not have a paper palette? Just say, here, these are your paper options. You can use this for, business cards, use this for your flyers, and then brag about it. Create a little icon that says printed on 100% recycled paper. People are going to resonate with that. People are going to remember it because it's different, it's unique. And then for the actual color palette, designers should be aware that there are certain Pantone colors that contain heavy metals. That list can be found in the book Green Graphic Design by Brian Doherty. I might have butchered his last name, but it's in that book. It probably exists online somewhere, but even just like shifting to a slightly different Pantone color could help a lot, so that we don't end up with these heavy metals in our groundwater and other places.
Yeah, I didn't know about that. I'm definitely going to look it up, and I think that's useful. So you actually create a kind of like a blueprint for your client. These are the paper that you know of that are very eco-friendly. So then when you talk to your printer, so here are the list of things that we want to use, and when you pick a PMS color, these are the color that we want to do. We want to stay away from these colors. So I think having a plan is actually very useful in going green.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just talking to local printers and just asking them what papers they already carry, because ones that they already order are gonna, obviously be better, because then they're not shipping extra paper, adding extra things just for you. I mean, unless it's like super nice paper, then yeah, go for it. But yeah, for sure, communication with printers is so important in that aspect too. And then kind of back to our earlier conversation about foils and glossy versus matte and stuff. I think, a lot of people like glossy because it is luxurious. Not all glossy papers are bad. There are, eco-friendly glossy papers that exist out there, but I think just, embracing the beauty of matte and finding a way to make that work for your brand can be a really powerful thing.
Yeah, question for you on the coating, because again, I've done enough printing. I know that gloss is mostly available, and in terms of price, they're most cost effective. Matte, not sometimes they cost a little more, but then when sometimes I've helped client gone uncoated. Uncoated is actually way more than doing matte and glossy. And then also depending on the type of paper, obviously when let's say we want white paper. Glosses is the most white, the most bright, right? When the more recycled content you put in paper, actually it's more brownish color. So the more recycled content you put on it. I've actually printed a few jobs on a cardboard type paper that's all brown. It's actually more tricky to print. You sometimes have to print more ink on it. So I think for designer standpoint, that's more work for you, to create a nice design, and you can certainly create different feel to it. But I think by knowing what the options are there, especially if you have helped them plan it, then they will know what to expect, because sometimes when you print the same PMS color on recycled paper and then on a 100% gloss paper, they could look different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that those are places where maybe printing just a couple of samples and really seeing what it's going to look like. Because yeah, for sure, there's some brands that the glossy, super bright white is going to look better. And then there's others where the slightly off-white recycled paper may elevate their brand and look nicer to them. So yeah, it's definitely a conversation, and you raised some good points, especially with needing more ink on brown paper. I haven't had as much experience with that. So yeah, that's an interesting thing to consider too. Yeah, especially if you're going with non-plant inks.
Mhm.
So yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, and then with all of this too, just kind of a disclaimer, like green design isn't going to save the planet as much as we want to think that what we're doing is going to, revolutionize everything. It's still really, really important. And I think we should be trying to be green in every way possible. But, we're in the middle of a climate crisis, and there's going to be huge impacts. Not to be like super dark, super grim, but really the future will be green or not at all. This is where we're shifting. From a scientific standpoint, we don't have that much time to really get our act together. I think it's until like 2030 until there's irreversible damage. So not a ton of time, but really shifting towards sustainability is going to help the future for, like our children, grandkids, future generations to come. And on top of that, Gen Z and millennials are demanding sustainable practices. They're much more likely to pay more for a recycled product. According to the Forbes article that I got this information from, it was a little over 60% of Gen Z and millennials would pay more for sustainable products. And that's a pretty decent percentage. And they're going to become the huge part of the market soon. So really, sustainable practices are going to benefit your bottom line as well as benefit the planet overall.
Yeah, speaking of bottom line, and when we normally think of going green, we think we have to pay more. We have to, it will be more expensive. Is that true, or how do you help client why they want to go green, and also people want to focus on their bottom line?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for sure, saying the word eco-friendly just makes people like clutch their wallets, like, oh no, I can't afford this. But it's really not that much of a price difference. Like when you talk about metallic foils, if you were already going to splurge and do metallic foils, that already costs more, and it's not eco-friendly. So like that's a double whammy. But when we're talking about recycled paper, it's actually on par with normal paper, or can sometimes even be cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked into a couple of paper stocks from Nina Paper and then Mohawk Paper. These are two paper companies that I love. They're overall pretty green and eco-friendly. So with Nina Paper, their Avon Brilliant White is non-recycled, and then their Post-Consumer 100 White for 5 sheets of 19 by 12.5-inch paper, exactly the same price. So not at all more expensive to go with the recycled. And then for Mohawk, their Superfine White is a non-recycled, and then their Renewal Harvest White is actually made from straw, so a different material source. There's a little bit of a price difference, but from 129 to 155 to 175, it's not. I mean, it's cents. Like it's not terribly much more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And another part of green design really is evaluating how much do you really need. Like if you're printing flyers and you're going to run 500 of them or something, really considering, do you need 500 or can you get away with 400 maybe, and then printing more if you run out. And that way it's going to cut costs. It's going to be more eco-friendly, and it's going to lower your impact.
It's good to know. So what would you suggest for viewers that are interested with the idea, and then maybe they're currently doing some, but how would people get their acts together? You talk about picking the specific paper, develop a new Pantone color, and then are there lists or are there more information they could look at if they wanted to be more green and sustainable?
Yeah, so I think that the book Green Graphic Design that I mentioned earlier, that's a really, really good place to start. It's a pretty quick read. For those of you who don't want to, pick up a book and read it, because I understand that sometimes, reading articles is much more accessible. I would say just, start by Googling green graphic design, green web design, see what's out there, and just start reading and thinking about it. Talking to your printer is a really good place to start as well, because they probably have a lot more knowledge on their paper stocks and what's going to be the most eco-friendly. For Pantone colors, talk to designers that you've worked with who might have created your colors. If you're a designer, go search out that list and really think about it. But also, just asking questions to anybody who has knowledge. I always love when I just get, random questions of like, hey, I'm looking for a paper. How eco-friendly is this versus like some other options, just asking questions and really being conscious about it is a great place to start. Sustainability is a journey and you don't have to be perfect about it right away. Small steps.
Yeah, I think, a good way, Amy, I think it's to talk to you. You know a lot about green design. I have had experience, for doing that. So I know, you could create pretty nice design for it. We recycle paper. Obviously, the look is going to be different. The feel is going to be different. But then that's what makes you special. Instead of going what industry standard is, people what expect, you actually create something new, something that people haven't seen or touched or even smelled before. Then you creating branding. You create more awareness by doing a little bit different than what most people do. Because think about if you in a branding standpoint, if everyone in your industry are doing the same postcard, flyers, same size, and you're coming up with a different size or maybe a different fold or even a different sort of paper to it. So do you think people are going to notice? With a good design, good execution, people are going to notice it. And if you have a nice campaign, letting people know that why you're doing that, the story behind why you're trying to go green, and you're going to actually get more publicity too. People are going to talk about your brand, and the why that you're doing. So the little money that you might spend in addition to traditional method are going to probably help you at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree 100% with all of that. And even from a personal standpoint, there's companies that I've found that use sustainable packaging, they use different materials. I recommend them to everybody because I'm so blown away with what they're doing. So it really does work, and word of mouth is huge. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much today, Amy. I'm going to have you send me all the link. I'll put the information, the name of the book on the chat box. So if viewer wanted to take a look at more, do that. I'm also going to put your contact information on there. So if any viewers thinking about going green or just want to have the conversation or have Amy check to see if you are sustainable the way that you think you are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds great. Thank you, Swire.
All right. Thank you so much, Amy. It's love having this conversation with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Take care.